security team to make our presence and mission in the Asia-Pacific a top priority. As a result,
today, under the name of Asia Pivot, the Obama administration continues to adhere to the imperial doctrine of no development in the Asia-Pacific region. Major nations of Asia are pit against each other over Trans-Pacific Partnership Treaty negotiation, the Senkaku Island dispute, the North Korean conflict, and other issues. The heightened military tension further adds to the turmoil. By 2020, 60% of U.S. naval ships will be moved to the Pacific. With new ABM systems, military bases, and deployment of nuclear submarines, a ring around China is now a virtual reality. This increased military and political tension in the region, if not resolved, can quickly lead to its intended consequence, thermonuclear warfare.
Every man, woman, and child lives under a nuclear sword of Damocles, hanging by the slenderest of threads, capable of being cut at any moment.
As the U.S. President John F. Kennedy looked toward the NWAPA project and a manned mission to the moon, and facing a threat of nuclear warfare in his time, the real challenge of war avoidance still remains today. Can the greatest defense of civilization be established in the process of development itself? If so, what are such projects that the United States and other nations can jointly embark on today as a common aim of mankind? What is a real Asia pivot that can end an imperial doctrine of war and instead bring about a much-needed physical economic transformation of the whole Asia-Pacific region? Thailand's Kra Canal typifies one such project. As we have introduced you to the great projects of the world such as NWAPA, transportation infrastructure for the Darien Gap, the Trans-Aqua Project for Africa, among others, here we treat the case of Southeast Asia and the Kra Canal, its history, and the strategic significance to the U.S. today.
We have to think with China right now, and with Japan, the whole Southeast Asia project, looking at that whole circle, that water system, water-bound system. And if we cut the Kra Canal through into the Indian Ocean, we will have a revolution in South Asia from just doing that, by just cutting through that isthmus of the Kra Canal isthmus, when putting an adequate piece in there, and opening that whole area to a maritime culture, a different kind of maritime culture, which will build up that area to bulwark other parts of the area.
The Kra Canal gets its name from the Isthmus of Kra in Thailand, the narrowest part of the Malay Peninsula. The Isthmus of Kra has been known as the most suitable site to cut a canal connecting the Gulf of Thailand and the Indian Ocean. The idea of excavating the Kra Canal goes back to the mid-17th century, when Thailand, then known as the Kingdom of Siam, opened up its country for European traders, thus becoming one of the biggest trading centers of Southeast Asia. The first proposal for a Kra Canal was made in 1677 by a French engineer, de la Mare, as a part of a survey to find a new sea trading route between the Gulf of Thailand and the Andaman Sea. Though his study demonstrated the possibility of the canal across the Isthmus of Kra, the project suddenly came to a halt when Siam cut its relationship with France in 1688, expelling all French from its capital, Ayutthaya. In 1882, the proposal for the Kra Canal reemerged when Ferdinand de Lesseps, a French engineer of the Suez Canal, completed in 1869, was sent to make a proposal for excavation once again. King Rama V, however, rejected the proposal, since France and other colonial powers were considered to be a threat to the sovereignty of Siam, rather than potential allies. The king's apprehension unfortunately was proven to be right, when in 1893 the Franco-Siamese War broke out. At the closing of the war, the Siamese were forced to cede Laos to France, and gradually most of its territory was seized by the two contending colonial powers at that time, France and Britain. Lord Rosebery, then the British Prime Minister, commented at that time, "The disgorging is a noble operation." The colonial partition of the land was quickly followed by a suppression of economic development. In April of 1897, the British made a secret agreement with Siam, which forbade the latter of its rights to develop a canal through the Isthmus of Kra without British consent. The agreement also brought exclusive commercial concessions in the area under British control. This imperial policy of no development continued throughout the 20th century. At the end of World War II, the Siamese government, which had allowed the Japanese to occupy the country rather than waging a pointless and bloody defense, was forced to impose even stricter limits on its economic development, not to mention the heavy war reparations imposed upon them. The 1946 Anglo-Thai Treaty Article 7 states that the Siamese government undertake that no canal linking the Indian Ocean and Gulf of Siam shall be cut across Siamese territory without the prior concurrence of the government of the United Kingdom. To further extort from Thailand, the treaty demanded the surrendering of Thailand's sovereign rights over production and export of rice, tin, rubber, and teak, in addition to a maximum of 1.5 million tons of rice to be made available to the British for free. On the surface, the concept of building a canal to bridge the Kra Isthmus hardly seems like an idea which would elicit such a reaction. But this should not be a surprise to the honest student of history, as President Franklin Roosevelt or John F. Kennedy were, being fully aware that the British Empire was a powerful entity which only changed its tactics, but never its motive, to suppress the economic and creative development of the vast majority of the population.
From the Cape, up the African coast to Aden, and across the ocean to Singapore, British sea power remains unchallenged.
Suppose, Lord Russell, this...
For example, in the words of one of Britain's elite, Bertrand Russell, this outlook is clear. In The Impact of Science on Society, he wrote, "Industry, except insofar as it ministers directly to the needs of agriculture, is a luxury." Russell was clearly no fan of industry, but neither did he support modern agriculture. In the same book, Russell says, "The danger of a world food shortage may be averted for a time by improvements in the technique of agriculture. But if a population continues to increase at the present rate, such improvements cannot long suffice. There will then be two groups, one poor with an increasing population, the other rich with a stationary population. Such a situation can hardly fail to lead to world war. War may be so destructive that, at any rate, for a time, there is no danger of overpopulation." And it was no secret which part of the human population someone like Russell, a mouthpiece for the British Empire, preferred. He said, "I find the colored people in the United States friendly and nice. They seem to have a dog's liking for the white man, the same kind of trust and ungrudging sense of inferiority. I don't feel any recoil from them." Another voice of the empire, Sir Halford John Mackinder, former head of the London School of Economics, once said, "Were the Chinese, for instance, organized by the Japanese to overthrow the Russian Empire and conquer its territory, they might constitute the yellow peril to the world's freedom." The views of the colonial powers, including Great Britain, towards the people who inhabited their colonies is no different. The building of the Kra Canal project would strike a blow to the remnants of the British Maritime Empire, of which Singapore remains an outpost, and hence the Straits of Malacca. The Kra Canal would significantly shorten this trade route. Historically, the United States has played a crucial role as a defender of this great project. Against the backdrop of the 1946 Anglo-Thai Treaty, only a few months later, an American diplomat, Charles Woodruff Yost, succeeded in arranging a new treaty between the U.S., UK, and the Kingdom of Siam. It was a total reversal of the imperial policy outlook. Yost's new treaty was established to take all possible measures for promoting and maintaining the maximum economic production in Siam of rice and certain other export commodities now in short world supply, and for facilitating the exportation of the surpluses of such commodities upon an equitable basis. The treaty mandated the U.S. and the U.K. to supply items required in connection with rice production and exportation, including milling, transportation, and repair of port facilities. This tradition was carried forward further when, in 1973, the American consulting firm Tippett Abbott McCarthy Stratton, or TAMS, in collaboration with Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, carried out an engineering and economic feasibility pre-study for a canal. Before getting into the details of this, let's review some of the project's dimensions. In the 20th century, the concept of the preferred location for the canal route generally shifted towards southern Thailand, as compared to the earliest proposed routes. We can compare the dimensions of a proposed Kra Canal with other well-known canals. The width of the Kra Isthmus at its narrowest point is around 27 miles. Compare this to the width of the Panama Canal, about 48 miles. The length of the various Kra Canal proposals range between 30 and 60 miles. The Suez Canal, for comparison, has a length of 119 miles. The height of the interior mountain chain where the Kra Canal would be constructed is about 246 feet. Compare this to the height at the Galliard Cut of the Panama Canal, which is slightly lower, at 210 feet. The Straits of Malacca are not sufficiently deep for many large ships to pass through. The straits are 620 miles long, but very narrow, less than 1.6 miles at the narrowest, and only 82 feet deep at the shallowest point. Currently, large ships are required to travel much further south to the Lombok Straits near Java, which have a depth of 820 feet. Clearly, a Kra Canal poses a more reasonable option than traveling so much further south for larger ships, or for any ship taking the 620-mile detour through the congested and pirate-infested Straits of Malacca. The 600-plus-mile Malacca Straits are by far the most heavily traveled of the world's canals, with more than twice the traffic of the Suez and Panama Canals combined. By a recent estimate, 1/5 of world trade goes through the Malacca Straits. Congestion or obstruction of the straits would dramatically increase the cost of trade, the maximum capacity of the Singapore and Malacca Straits being 200,000 ships annually. A more recent assessment estimates that the traffic of the straits has been increasing at an annual rate of 20%. In 1973, TAMS Engineering had conducted a study of choices of Kra Canal routes and suggested that Route 5A was the most suitable for the construction of a Kra Canal. At either end of the canal would be located industrial zones estimated to span collectively around 100,000 acres. A decade later, in 1983 and 84, the Fusion Energy Foundation and Executive Intelligence Review, together with the Thai Ministry of Communication, held 2 successful conferences on the Kra Canal project. FEF updated the earlier feasibility study done by TAMS and developed further on the project's economic and industrial benefits. The fall 1984 conference, entitled Industrialization of Thailand and the Kra Canal, took place in Bangkok, Thailand. The conference brought together businessmen, engineers, and government officials from all of the ASEAN countries to hash out the feasibility of building the canal.
The idea of digging the canal, of course, was picked up again in 1983 when Lyndon LaRouche traveled to Thailand and organized an international conference on the Grat Canal. The participations were very good. We had representatives from India, representatives from Indonesia, representatives from Malaysia, representative from Japan. In 1983, we didn't have a representative from China, but the Chinese are very, very observant about what we were doing. We have participation of the Ministry of Transport and Communications of Thailand. The minister, Mr. Samak Suntarawet himself, came to deliver a speech at the conference along with Lyndon LaRouche. Also, we have the participation of the GIF, Global Infrastructure Fund Group from Japan. We have Dr. Yamamoto from GIF Group, as well as participations from Japan, like a very prominent figure like Mr. Nakajima of the Mitsubishi Research Institute, a very, very prominent figure from Mitsubishi Group. We have Mr. Saito also from Toshiba Group, and we have lots of participations of the Kedan Ren. So that was back in 1983.
The 4 panels during the conference covered all aspects, including a presentation by EIR-FEF researchers on the use of PNEs, or peaceful nuclear explosions, as the fastest, most efficient, and cost-effective method of construction.
You're talking about explosions which are thousands of feet beneath the surface of the Earth.
Milo Nordyke of Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in the U.S., and Harry Akesian of TAM's engineering firm, both of which groups were involved in the 1973 feasibility study for the canal, presented the physical parameters for building the canal using both nuclear and conventional methods. There were also Japanese representatives at the conference from 10 top corporations, among them the Mitsubishi Corporation, who had sparked the initial renewed interest in the canal during the 1970s, promoting the project as part of their Global Infrastructure Fund concept. A later Japanese plan also advocated for the use of nuclear technology in the construction of the canal in a 1985 report. This plan would have used over 20 nuclear devices, each roughly twice the explosive energy of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. This proposal harkened back to a U.S. program called Operation Plowshare, which was in place from 1961 to 1977, which focused on the development of techniques to use nuclear explosions for peaceful purposes.
The United States is conducting, for the benefit of all nations, a program it calls Plowshare. The program borrowed its name from words of the prophet Isaiah, in keeping with its goal to beat the destructive blade of the nuclear sword into a plowshare that would cut deep into the earth for the betterment of all mankind.
Project Plowshare had completed 27 nuclear explosions and proposed using the technique to widen the Panama Canal, among other projects, such as creating an artificial harbor at Cape Thompson, Alaska. The environmentalist movement campaigned enthusiastically to shut down Operation Plowshare, a program which represented the Atoms for Peace outlook first outlined by the Eisenhower administration. While other options for canal construction do exist and could be developed, it would be immoral to avoid discussion of the nuclear option in the name of appeasing the seemingly all-powerful environmentalist movement, many of whose advocates would just as soon see the population of Southeast Asia continue to live in abject poverty, if not to drastically decrease their numbers altogether.
Overall technical responsibility for Plowshare is assigned to the Atomic Energy Commission's Lawrence Radiation Laboratory at Livermore.
We have some representative from the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, one scientist who participated in the so-called peaceful nuclear excavation. And they were thinking of using peaceful nuclear excavation to dig the canal. That was even back in 1973 when Edward Teller, prominent scientist from the United States, of course he was involved in the hydrogen bomb. He suggested that the digging of the canal will be executed through the peaceful nuclear excavation. And the idea was very simple, by using small hydrogen bomb to blow up the root. Even I was told that Edward Teller was very pleased, and he guaranteed to everybody there would be no fallout problem, there will be no pollution problem, and he was willing to move all of his family to the area of the canal.
Mr. Samak Suntorawet, the Minister of Communications of Thailand and later Prime Minister, set the tone in his keynote address of October 31st. The question is, can we do it? How and which way? If we use TNT, it will take 10 years. But if we use atomic energy for peace, it will shorten the excavation time by 5 years. Minister Samak also stressed the importance of the project for the world. The final impact will not only be beneficial for Thailand, but also for the region, as well as any other country that uses it. We should, therefore, dedicate it to the world. The discussion at the 1984 Bangkok conference showed a revival of a pro-development commitment from some in the U.S., Thailand, and Japan. The principal justification for this project is not the canal itself per se, but the broader development of industry and trade, manufacturing and agricultural enterprises, and the fostering of overall productivity enabled by the canal. According to an estimate made in 1985, port development and industrialization around the canal zone would provide employment to up to 1 million people, including 250,000 jobs in relatively high-skilled job categories in Thailand. Indicative of the potential for this kind of broader development was the proposal from a spokesman from Lawrence Livermore, who suggested that a major nuclear isotope separation plant could be constructed as part of the Kra Canal complex of industrial centers, constructed at both ends of the canal. Lyndon LaRouche at the 1983 Kra Conference also remarked, "The prospect of establishing a sea-level waterway through the Isthmus of Thailand ought to be seen not only as an important development of basic economic infrastructure, both for Thailand and the cooperating nations of the region. This proposed canal should also be seen as a keystone around which might be constructed a healthy and balanced development of needed basic infrastructure in a more general way." It was during this same period that LaRouche and the Fusion Energy Foundation were involved in another program calling for the peaceful use of nuclear technology, the Strategic Defense Initiative. One of the first nuclear developments in Southeast Asia took place, ironically, during the Vietnam War, with the help of the United States. In the midst of the Vietnam War, the Kennedy administration helped to open up Vietnam's first nuclear research reactor as a part of Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace program.
Pledged to turn swords into plowshares, John F. Kennedy launched
its official inauguration on October 29, 1963, was participated in by Ngo Dinh Diem, the American ambassador Henry Cabot Lodge, and a representative of the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. Kennedy also signed on to National Security Memorandum 263, which stipulated the necessary U.S. support for increasing the productivity of the Mekong Delta region, along with a withdrawal of 1,000 U.S. military personnel from Vietnam by the end of the year. Merely 1 month after the inauguration of Vietnam's nuclear reactor, this glimpse of hope for Asia, however, suddenly disappeared with the assassinations of both Diem and Kennedy.
And so we shall never know how different the world might have been had fate permitted this blazing talent to live and labor longer at man's unfinished agenda for peace and progress for all.
However, the prospect of peace through development still exists and is quietly waiting for its realization.
Demand for energy could soon outstrip supply in Southeast Asia, threatening economic growth. To help meet demand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam plan to build nuclear power plants in the next decade. Others in the region hope to follow them.
Today, in terms of large-scale power generation, Southeast Asia does not have any nuclear power plants of significance. Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, and the Philippines each have 1 or 2 TRIGA reactors apiece. But these are small nuclear reactors mainly used for research purposes in universities. The story of the Philippines underlines the fact that the lack of nuclear power in this region is no accident.
The Philippines' Bataan plant is the only nuclear power facility in Southeast Asia, but it was never used.
The Philippines was to have the first nuclear plant in Southeast Asia, whose construction began in 1976. Construction was completed by 1986. But the Bataan nuclear plant was literally mothballed before it had generated any power. The puppet Aquino government submitted to pressure to stop with plans for the plant. But this was after the entire facility had already been built. To this day, the Philippines, without ever having benefited from the nuclear power the Bataan plant could have given them, is paying bills for the construction and maintenance of the facility. The Save the Nation movement in the Philippines, led by Butch Valdez, also head of the Philippines LaRouche Society, has led the effort to revive nuclear power in the Philippines.
The Save the Nation movement focuses on the specific program that has to be implemented at the soonest possible time if we are to save our republic. We have a statement of the Save the Nation movement which comprises of 3 urgent steps to be implemented if our nation is to survive. The first is that government must initiate a massive food production program, which is science-driven and infrastructure-based, which will double, triple, or even quadruple the amount of food that we produce. Second is that we need to be dependent on our own indigenous source of energy. We have a nuclear power plant that has been mothballed since early 1986. The scientists and engineers that have gone through it, including the IAEA, have stated that it will take roughly about a year to 18 months to be able to rehabilitate this and get it operational at a minimal cost of less than $1 billion.
The concept of a nuclear-powered Asia has also come under attack more recently. After the 2011 magnitude 9 earthquake which hit Japan, the focus turned quickly away from the tens of thousands of actual deaths caused by the ensuing tsunami towards the so-called threat posed by Japan's nuclear power facilities. Japan has a total of 50 nuclear plants and was forced to shut all of these down or to suspend operations in the face of this pressure. A handful have since opened back up, and it appears that there is movement to continue in this direction.
The plant once again is gearing up to resume full operations.
There are plans elsewhere in Southeast Asia to build new nuclear plants. Recently, Vietnam struck an intergovernmental agreement with Russia for the construction of the first nuclear power plant with a loan issued by Russia. Currently, a total of 12 nuclear reactors are planned to be constructed using Russian, Japanese, and South Korean technology. As of October 2012, Thailand was conducting a feasibility study for the construction of a nuclear power plant, and a similar effort is taking place in Cambodia for the construction of a nuclear power plant on Kong Island. While these developments certainly point towards progress, they are still a far cry from where things should be. China shows a good example, with 16 nuclear plants and big plans for expansion. Close to 30 plants are under construction, and additional reactors are planned, including some of the world's most advanced, such as a 200-megawatt high-temperature gas-cooled nuclear reactor, which is scheduled to be completed in 2017. This would give a 5- or 6-fold increase in nuclear electricity production capacity to 58 gigawatts by 2020, and then possibly 400 gigawatts by 2050. An ample supply of power generated by nuclear plants can create a great industrial potential in Southeast Asia. This can be further bolstered by a linking up of the major capitals of Asian nations through a high-speed rail network, which is partially underway already. The world's longest high-speed rail route, running from the Chinese capital Beijing to Guangzhou in the south, opened last year. Traveling at an average speed of 186 miles per hour, the rail traverses 1,428 miles, the equivalent of a distance between Washington, D.C. and Houston, Texas, in 8 hours. In contrast, U.S. Amtrak trains traveling from New York to Miami, a shorter distance, still take nearly 30 hours. China's high-speed rail network was only established in 2007. By 2010, it covered 5,193 miles, and by 2020, it is expected to cover around 9,941 miles. The rail links are also spreading to Southeast Asia. The proposal for the Kunming-Singapore Railway was put back on the table last year when the Chinese offered a $7 billion loan for the construction of a north-south railway, a missing link between China's major southern city, Kunming, to the capital city of Laos, Vientiane. The original idea of a rail link between Singapore and Kunming came out after the completion of the Trans-Siberian Railroad. Here we see several of the proposed routes. In 2000, ASEAN proposed an eastern route which would run through Cambodia and Vietnam. In 2004, ASEAN and China proposed a shorter route which would run through Myanmar. This route would also intersect the concept of a new special economic zone and deep-sea port at Dawei in Myanmar, which would effectively connect the Indian Ocean basin and the South China Sea. The most recently entertained route would run straight through Laos. The railway would be over 250 miles long and would require construction of 76 tunnels and 154 bridges, including 2 across the Mekong River. When complete, it would take only 10 hours to travel from Kunming to Singapore, as compared to the 72 hours it currently takes only to travel between Singapore and Vientiane. This rail project, when complete, will link Southeast Asia to China, opening up a new potential for Asia-Pacific development. The link is not only through high-speed rail, but also along the Mekong River, a major trading route between southwestern China, Laos, Myanmar, and Thailand. Construction of dams along the Mekong River started last year to alleviate navigational difficulties such as the extreme seasonal variations in flow and the presence of rapids and waterfalls. More importantly, the better water management and distribution along the entire Mekong Basin can transform the agricultural and industrial potential of the region. There are numerous proposals on the books for the development of the water resources and land potential in Southeast Asia. One aspect of these developments is represented in a concept developed by Ton Siharat of Laos, which he calls SIWAPA, or the Southeast Asian Water and Power Alliance, modeled on the concept of the North American Water and Power Alliance for North America. What distinguishes Laos from the rest of Southeast Asia is that the 7-month monsoonal rains, the Pacific typhoons, and the melting ice from Tibet deposit more fresh water on Laotian territory than anywhere else on Earth. CWAPA presents a comprehensive plan of development for Southeast Asia as a whole. One component of CWAPA calls for the completion of on-the-books proposals for dams along the Mekong River, and to comprehensively dam the river at geographically suitable points to make it navigable all year round from the sea. There are almost no dams on the Mekong currently outside of a few in China. Environmentalist groups typically shriek in response to these proposals. Laos has recently won a victory in the face of this by breaking ground on the Xayaburi Dam site. A sketch of how CWAPA could unfold, as envisioned by Tone, would begin with the completion of dam and hydropower projects such as the Hue Sampoi and projects for the Zaebang Phai River. He also envisions using the abundant precipitation in Laos for modern hydroponic systems, with a hydroponic tower pilot project to be built in Vientiane. Dams such as the Nam Num, the oldest dam in Laos, should be upgraded. Other Mekong dams should be built in Laos and elsewhere, and dams can be built on other Laotian Mekong tributaries such as the Kong and Bang Hiang rivers. These rivers flow from the Annamite mountain range, which runs for hundreds of miles between Vietnam and Laos. Tone adds that Laos needs the technical advice of the American water engineers guiding the Nawapa project for the best location and specifications for some of the dams. Excess water to all these requirements can be stored in existing low underground reservoirs in Laos. The fresh drinking water and hydroelectricity surplus to Laos's needs can be distributed using oil pipeline technology to other countries in Southeast Asia, southern China, Afghanistan, and even the dry Middle East, completely transforming the potential of the land.
It is a vital need now that Glass-Steagall Act be reinstated and investment banks be liquidated as soon as possible to save Europe.
As Japanese economist Daisuke Kotegawa has noted, the collaboration around the Canal project between China and Japan, for example, would not only help to diffuse tensions between them, but encouraging this type of collaboration would also outflank the dangerous geopolitical game which the Obama administration has created. As Lyndon LaRouche once wrote, discussions of Pacific Basin cooperation will continue to be merely discussions until the question is directly stated. How might the foreign policy of the USA toward Asia be transformed to conform to the vital interests of the United States? The question must be posed. How might the United States return to the political, philosophical world outlook of its founders, or more recently, the proposed post-war foreign policy of President Franklin D. Roosevelt?
We are fighting on the same side as the brave people of China.
This can be accomplished if the United States does what is required to return to the world outlook of President Franklin Roosevelt. This outlook can be revived by taking action similar in principle to Roosevelt, starting with the restoration globally of the Glass-Steagall Act, restoring sanity to the world financial system, such that great visions, typified by the Canal, can become reality.